Nearly 30 years later, I played Daggerfall to experience it as fully as possible in 2025, or at least as fully as anyone realistically can. If the first chapter of The Elder Scrolls, Arena, was an underrated trailblazer that laid the foundations of a gaming dynasty, The Elder Scrolls 2 Daggerfall was the colossus that combined genius and madness. The freedom to be whoever you want and do whatever you want, mixed with bugs, glitches, and an overdose of procedural generation. A game that was, perhaps, just too ambitious for its time. All of this to answer one question. Is it worth playing today? Bethesda Softworks published Arena in 1994, and over time it became a cult hit. It was mostly a dungeon crawler with fantasy life sim elements. You could wander cities across Tamriel, look for jobs, and explore the countryside in search of crypts or bandit hideouts. But ultimately you had to delve into massive, labyrinthine dungeons to recover the pieces of the Staff of Chaos and finally face Jagar Tharn, the evil Imperial battle mage who had imprisoned the Emperor in the Plane of Oblivion. Immediately after Arena appeared in stores, while the team was still working on patches to fix its bugs, Daggerfall was greenlit for development. The successor was coming. 2 years later, after an amazingly short development cycle for a game of its size, it was released to the public and shook the computer RPG scene. While categorized as an open-world action RPG, it was really a fantasy life sim, or at least as close to one as the technology of the time allowed. It was a substitute GM for the gaming table. You could create an incredible detailed character, ignore the main story, and live the life of a noble knight or a bloodthirsty monstrous beast. Before diving in further, let me briefly introduce myself. I'm a completionist gamer who plays RPGs and story-based games. I like to experience video games through multiple playthroughs, looking for story branches, alternate endings, and secrets, stopping only when I feel I've seen everything a game has to offer. I believe this attitude gives me some credibility when sharing my thoughts about a game. You might agree or disagree with me, of course, but at least you know I have solid experience with the subject. But Daggerfall is a whole different beast. Normally, in a full completion review, I finish every quest, explore every location, and push systems to their limits. But Daggerfall's procedural world makes true 100% completion impossible. This game is staggering in scope. The Iliac Bay is the size of Great Britain. There are 15,000 towns, dungeons, and other locations, countless quests, and the vast majority of them are procedurally generated. I satisfied my completionist needs by trying different playstyles, thoroughly exploring the major handcrafted locations, completing all the guild quest lines, and obtaining on my main playthrough the best possible gear that could be found and enchanted in the game. Daggerfall's ambition is breathtaking, but the technical limitation of its 1996 engine, combined with some design decisions and its short development cycle, led to bugs, crashes, a clunky interface, and massive, repetitive dungeons that could make the experience frustrating even for seasoned players. That's where Daggerfall Unity comes in. This modern rebuild preserves the original scope and systems, while vastly improving usability, stability, and visual clarity. With it, the game transforms from an overwhelming grind into a frankly still grindy, but far more accessible and rewarding RPG experience. In this video, you'll see footage from both versions of the game, the original and the Unity rebuild, though the vast majority will be from Daggerfall Unity. I played the original version for a while to gain first-hand experience, but Unity is definitely the way to play it today. I don't have an exact counter for the total hours I spent in this game, but judging from the footage I recorded, it's around 200 hours. This was also my first time truly playing Daggerfall. I tried a demo of it when I was a kid. It came with the gaming magazine I used to spend my allowance on, but it was very limited and I didn't really enjoy it. The only thing I clearly remember is entering a random house and finding a naked woman inside. That certainly caught my attention, but I was playing it on my dad's computer, so it wasn't a good idea to continue. Not that my father is a prude or anything, he's much worse than me nowadays than he's old, but my mother would have rained hell on us. My real experiences with the Elder Scrolls series started with Morrowind, which I never finished back then, but they are mostly rooted in Oblivion and of course Skyrim. I'm now on a voyage to play all of them in order, wish me luck. Before moving on, one final note. With older RPGs, reading the manual that came with them is almost mandatory. Daggerfall is no exception. Its manual not only explains the technical basics, like the interface and combat, but it also introduces the Iliac Bay and the main story, with the narrative depth the game itself doesn't always reach. It's a proper player's handbook, detailing everything you need to create your character, such as race and class features. It introduces the game world, explains equipment, and even includes a bestiary, like a monster manual, complete with suggestions on how to face different enemies. Unsurprisingly, it's nearly 100 pages long. I highly suggest at least skimming through it before playing. Daggerfall Unity includes a brief text tutorial at the beginning, which helps, but it doesn't cover everything you'll need. Without further ado, let's dive in. In 1992, two games barged into the video game industry and showed that 3D gaming was possible: Ultima Underworld and Wolfenstein 3D. Ultima Underworld, released in March 1992, was developed by Blue Sky Productions, later known as Looking Glass Studios after a merger. Founded by former Origin Systems employee Paul Neurath, the studio went on to release other incredible classics like System Shock and Thief. Neurath had enjoyed playing the Wizardry series on the Apple II, but felt its abstract visuals hindered immersion. Later, when he played Dungeon Master on the Amiga, he saw its first-person perspective as a glimpse into the future. We're talking the 80s, and none of these games had a true 3D engine at the time. By 1990, Neurath had assembled a small team that created a prototype 3D engine, which they showcased at the same year's Consumer Electronics Show. Warren Spector, a producer at Origin, was so impressed by it that the two companies reached a publishing agreement that summer, leading to the development of Ultima Underworld within the Ultima universe. Wolfenstein 3D, a personal staple of my early teens, was developed by id Software and published in May 1992. id Software was founded by later industry legends John Carmack and John Romero. Besides helping establish the entire first-person shooter genre, Wolfenstein 3D was essentially a remake of the early 80s game Castle Wolfenstein. The game presented the rudimentary 3D environments, with enemies and objects rendered as 2D sprites from various angles. This style was sometimes called 2.5D graphics, and we'll encounter similar elements again later in this video. Now, hold on with me for just a moment longer. In March 1994, Bethesda Softworks, a company known for sports titles and holding the license for Terminator games, published a game that wasn't perfect, maybe not even particularly good, but it was still the beginning of an era: The Elder Scrolls Arena, part dungeon crawler and part fantasy life simulator. It struggled to sell at first, but eventually, as I said before, it became a cult hit. I played this iconic game and, while some of its mechanics haven't aged well, it found a place in my heart. I especially enjoyed wandering through its different cities across Tamriel, accompanied by its chiptune music. My Breton character Aluk, misspelled as Aulk in Arena because I used the key mod for movement that scrambled my keyboard, became my go-to character for every major playthrough I've done of the Elder Scrolls series. The developers of Arena were heavily influenced by Ultima Underworld and a relatively obscure game called Legends of Valor. If you play either of these today, even briefly, just to sample them for history's sake, the similarities with Arena are striking. Development was also troubled. What started as an arena battle simulator where you could hire gladiators eventually turned into full-blown RPG. The name Arena stuck, reframed as a reflection of Tamriel itself, with its constant political and racial infighting. Vijay Lakshman, apologies again for most likely butchering his name, as in the previous retrospective, was the game director, producer, and designer, and he added the now iconic line to the intro, as the Elder Scrolls foretold, mostly because it sounded cool. No series was planned at the time, but since Arena sold decently well, a franchise was born. As the story goes, while Vijay was still working on Arena patches, development on the second game had already begun. He soon left, and Ted Peterson, his assistant designer on Arena, became the lead designer of the sequel. The late Julian Lefay, who sadly passed away recently, was a programmer on Arena, and went on to become Daggerfall's director while still programming for it. Bethesda was a revolving door of talent at the time. The team was small by today's standards, and many names came and went. Working conditions were grueling, with constant constant crunch. As LeFay recalled in a recent interview, they worked 18-hour days, and the lack of physical activity nearly killed him. Alongside Peterson and LeFay, other notable contributors included Bruce Nesmith as designer and Mark Jones and Louise Sandoval as artists. The project was initially called Mournhold, intended to be set in Morrowind, but the setting was eventually moved northwest to the Iliac Bay. By mid-1994, it was renamed Daggerfall, after one of the major kingdoms in the region. It was probably the most dramatic name. Wayrest and Sentinel, the other two major kingdoms, didn't carry the same weight. According to LeFay, the central idea behind Daggerfall was to let the computer act as dungeon master. The team, avid D&D players at the time, wanted to replicate the same sense of freedom found in pen and paper RPGs. They also hoped to let players import their arena characters, but the major changes to character creation made that impossible. Daggerfall was first built on an unnamed 2.5D raycasting engine, later abandoned. 2.5D created the illusion of 3D space, but gameplay was limited to a flat plane. Raycasting, the technique behind it, was a shortcut. Instead of fully rendering 3D environments, the engine projected textures by tracing a single vertical ray per column of the screen. The result looked 3D, but it wasn't. A perfect example is Wolfenstein 3D, where levels were made of flat walls, floors, and ceilings, with the engine stretching textures to fake depth. Eventually, this system was dropped in favor of Bethesda's own X engine, one of the first true 3D engines. It had already powered the Terminator Future Shock in 1995 and Terminator Skynet in the same year, 1996. Details on it are scarce today, but at the time, Bethesda promoted it as being able to handle fully textured 3D environments, dynamic weather, and complex terrain. Switching to X engine solved the limitations of 2.5D and allowed Daggerfall to deliver a much larger, more believable world. After Arena's release, Bethesda received complaints from fans about its theme story, so Peterson essentially said, "You want a real story? I'll give you a story," and began writing a Shakespearean-inspired epic influenced by Hamlet. Squeezing value from his English literature degree, he crafted a story that wasn't predetermined from the start, but could shift based on the player's choices. In many ways, Daggerfall's main quests resemble a series of D&D adventures, seemingly unrelated at first, but gradually forming a larger campaign that comes together by the end. Unlike Arena, Daggerfall wasn't heavily inspired by other games, but was instead a refinement of the formula. Beyond the main story, influences came from the team's own D&D campaign, the pen and paper game Vampire the Masquerade, and the literature Peterson was reading at the time, such as Dumas' The Man in the Iron Mask. The team worked hard to prepare a teaser for the 1994 CIS convention. Daggerfall didn't get a grand reveal, but instead trickled information until Bethesda felt ready for a proper showcase. A computer gaming world cover story in late 1994 kicked things off, followed by a trailer at Winter CIS in January 1995. The trailer teased parts of the story and featured local theater actors and Bethesda staff reenacting scenes. It may seem odd today, but at the time, publishers loved including full-motion videos in their games. Pre-recorded cutscenes were in vogue. PC Games magazine noted that RPG fans weren't asking for interactive movies, but solid gameplay. Luckily, the FMV presence was limited to the intro. A flood of magazine coverage followed, with early claims about the game that didn't all make it into the final release. For example, players could indeed assign character advantages and disadvantages, but they couldn't have missing limbs as once advertised. Importing arena characters also proved impossible due to system changes. Other promises, like creating custom classes, becoming a vampire, and crafting potions, were fulfilled. Some other features landed somewhere in between. Bethesda teased full underwater levels, but only underwater dungeon sections made it in. These weren't deliberate lies, at least I think. The team genuinely intended to implement everything, but some features were cut. Still, many of the advertised features did make it, which is impressive even today. Imagine a modern open-world RPG launching with all this content. Peterson even wanted more, like dynamic faction conflicts and cities under siege, features that would later appear, at least partially, in future Elder Scrolls entries. Lead artists Mark Jones and Louise Sandoval began work on concept art. Jones also created the Daggerfall logo, in-game characters and textures, while Sandoval worked on hand-drawn characters and the cover art. Jones proposed generating sprites from 3D models, but Peterson and LeFay were skeptical, fearing they would look like origami. They preferred hand-drawn sprites like in Arena, but Jones went ahead and produced sample renders, and when he showed them, both Peterson and LeFay were so impressed they told him to proceed. As a result, Daggerfall Daggerfall ended up using a mix of rendered and hand-drawn sprites. The cover art went through multiple iterations, from blue to black designs, with the UK even receiving a unique version. Journalists expressed concern about the unusually long 2-year development cycle, which is nothing by today's standards. The game was so large it became Bethesda's first CD-ROM-only release, no longer offered on floppy disks. True to Bethesda tradition, though, it launched with bugs, and patches had to be distributed on floppy disks. I find comfort in noticing that some things never change. Looking back, it's amazing what such a relatively small team achieved. The game was far from perfect, and the classic version is still prone to crashes and bugs even today, but it remains a remarkable accomplishment. To wrap up this section, here are a couple of anecdotes. The Entertainment Software Rating Board, you might know it as the ESRB, was founded in 1994, and Ted Peterson had to fill out their questionnaire. The questions were things like, is there nudity in the game, and can you harm innocent people? He enthusiastically answered yes to all of them, thinking it sounded cool. I don't know how he didn't recognize them as trick questions, to be fair. As a result, Daggerfall received the worst possible rating, which, at the time, worried publishers who didn't yet see the value of mature-rated games. Then, Senators Lieberman and Cole included Daggerfall on their 10 least wanted computer games list, calling it inappropriate for children. Ironically, that only fueled the hype. Daggerfall has been free-to-play since 2009, when Bethesda made it available for download from their website to celebrate the series' 15th anniversary. Later, it became available on Steam, GOG, and the unofficial Elder Scrolls Pages website, always for free. The classic copy I played is the Steam version, mainly because I prefer keeping all my games in one place. Steam updated the game on June 7, 2022, to the latest official patch and added the game manual and a reference card as PDFs in the game's directory. It does not include the Comp USA expansion, the special edition released for these stores with 16 new quests, but they are now easily available on the UESP website. The Steam version, and likely the GOG version too, comes with DOSBox pre-installed, so you can play the classic game straight away. The original controls, while janky by today's standards, were innovative at the time because Daggerfall offered two control schemes. The first is the cursor-based interface, similar to Arena's. The mouse cursor changes shape depending on context. Left-click moves in the desired direction, and pressing Alt lets you move the cursor freely. Interactions happen when the cursor appears as an X. The second scheme is the view-based interface. The mouse lets you look freely, arrow keys move your character, spacebar interacts with objects, and Enter releases the mouse cursor for interface use. You can remap the keys, and this control scheme is incredibly similar to what became the industry standard later. It was forward-thinking, and they were not sure anyone would have played with it. Anyway, it still feels clunky today, and for a better experience, I recommend a different approach. Even after the latest official patch, the classic version is still buggy, so many unofficial patches exist to fix quests, crashes, and other issues, all listed on the UESP. You could pursue these if you want the full retro experience, but the best way to play Daggerfall today is through Daggerfall Unity, also called DFU, and essentially all sources online agree. DFU is also free and a legal recreation of the game in the Unity engine. It uses the original assets. When installing it from the Daggerfall Workshop website, you need to link it to an original Daggerfall installation. DFU doesn't fundamentally change the game unless you heavily mod it, but it improves lighting, supports high-resolution widescreens, including UI scaling, increases draw distance, smooths first-person controls, and adds many quality-of-life improvements. One major improvement is the dungeons. In the original, procedural dungeons were often buggy, sometimes leaving quest objectives unreachable, a huge frustration during multi-hour dungeon runs. This was one of the three main reasons I switched to DFU. I had played about 20 hours of the classic version on Steam, but crashes, awkward controls, and broken dungeons were wearing me down. Restarting in Daggerfall Unity immediately improved my experience. I didn't make many initial changes, aside from swapping the health and stamina bars, which had inverted colors compared to usual expectations. After a few dozen hours, however, the dungeons became exhausting. Most guild quests send you into one, and I noticed many players online bypass them by cheating, using the in-game console to teleport to objectives, then recalling out, or delving the dungeon backwards by teleporting to the objective and exploring back to find the exit. At that point, using a mod made more sense. DFU includes a smaller dungeons toggle, which reduces dungeon size from a group of blocks to a single block with 4 borders. I probably explored about 100 dungeons. It was a huge sanity saver. Other useful DFU options include choosing your own guild quests instead of being randomly assigned and allowing repairs of magical items. In a long Daggerfall playthrough, randomly generated guild missions can feel like chores, having you complete the same task over and over, or send you to your death when you're not ready to face a certain enemy. Choosing quests allowed me to methodically experience everything a guild offered based on rank, making progression much clearer and more enjoyable. At the end of the day, if you're not a hardcore retro gamer playing Daggerfall on a vintage 486 and you want to genuinely experience this milestone RPG, play it in Daggerfall Unity. Use a couple of quality of life mods if you need, and don't feel ashamed. Absolutely. They will save you time, frustration, and help you actually enjoy the game. Character creation is one of the major overhauls Daggerfall implemented from Arena, and in my opinion, one of the bigger strengths of the game. It allows you to create almost any sort of character you might imagine, from a super overpowered one to a very unplayable guy or gal if you want to challenge yourself. You can be almost any kind of hero or villain you want to be. Noble Knight? Check. Wood Elf Ranger with a bow? Check. Powerful mage hurling devastating spells at your enemies? Check. But these are just some very general characters. Do you want some weird in-between class, like some sort of arcane archer or a spellcaster that wears heavy armor and can also use a two-handed sword? You can. You can even be a bloodthirsty werewolf, climbing on houses and jumping from roof to roof to avoid city guards. And this is where the true replayability of Daggerfall comes into play. It's a bit of a pity that a complete diplomat character is not possible, since there is a lot of politics and diplomacy involved in the game. I could see a pacifist run set in the Daggerfall main story if you played your cards well with factions and nobility. But as Ted Peterson said in an interview, Tamriel is called the arena, so eventually you need to pull out a blade. Back to character creation mechanics. You start by selecting your character's own province, just like in Arena. And just like in Arena, you can't select the Imperial province as your home, nor be an orc. Orcs will become part of the Empire after this game's events. A brief description of what the races are good at will be presented, but refer to the game manual for the real details. Then you select your character gender. Yes, a 1996 game used the word gender. And the big Daggerfall option comes. Would you like to choose your class from a list, create a custom one, or answer 10 questions, again like in Arena, to determine which class is most apt for your character? There are 18 classes to choose from, and you'll probably recognize them from the previous game. Or you can create a custom one, and honestly, this is the most fun part of character creation. Give your class a unique name, and start by raising the attributes you need, lowering the ones you don't. You can start with as much as a value of 75 in an attribute, by lowering another one you don't need by the 25 points of difference. Daggerfall is a difficult game at the beginning, so there is no shame in tailoring your character as you see fit. Or, let's be honest, min-maxing a bit. Attributes are the same you find in all the Elder Scrolls games, except in Skyrim. 50 is the average score, with anything below that being bad, anything above being good. Attributes are also said to influence their related skills, but this is not true. There is no known influence between attributes and skills. Daggerfall, contrary to Arena, which only had the 8 core attributes to define your build, introduced 35 skills to govern pretty much anything your character can do. But more on that in a moment. This is one of the main reasons why they couldn't have you import your character from Arena. The character sheet is too different. They tried to make it work in different ways, but none of them were good enough, so they completely scrapped the option to use your Eternal Champion in Daggerfall. Let's have a look at those attributes. Strength governs how much you can carry, hand-to-hand and most of your melee damage, and your maximum fatigue. Thankfully, fatigue is not an asshole like in Morrowind, but if you deplete it, you will fall on the ground, and if in a dungeon, you might fall prey to the monsters there and never wake up. Thankfully, finding a place to rest and replenishing it is easy. You can do it almost anywhere. You don't need increasingly rarer raised platforms to do so like in Arena. Intelligence dictates how many spell points you have, and they are few. You never have enough of them in Daggerfall. If you want to play a spellcaster, you need to take a specific advantage later on, increased magery. I'll go through the advantages in a minute. Willpower increases your spell resistance at a rate of 1 bonus point for every 10 points in it, and influences all the magic school skills. There are 6 magic schools, like Destruction, Restoration, and so on. If you're good at throwing fireballs, it doesn't mean you're also good at healing. Agility, as always in this series, is the most important attribute to raise. It governs your ability to hit something and to avoid being hit. Endurance dictates your hit points, healing rate when resting, resistance to poison and diseases, and fatigue. Personality governs your social skills, theoretically modifying how an NPC reacts when talking to you. It's essentially useless. You get so many quests that require you to ask around a lot to find a specific building or a specific person, but the common NPC will often rebuff you even with high personality and streetwise skill. Nobles' opinions of you are useful, especially for the main quest, but you can raise a faction's opinion of you by doing quests for them. Speed influences your movement and attack rate. Pretty useful. The more you swing your weapon, the more you hit. Finally, luck modifies pretty much every skill test and the chance of an enemy hitting you. It doesn't influence loot. Some think this is a very important attribute to have, but I disagree. I easily ended the playthrough counting on my combat-related attributes and skills alone, with just a little bit of utility magic. I don't need luck, I have ammo. Then we have the skills to distribute into primary, major, and minor. All the ones that are left out will end up in the miscellaneous category. These categories influence the starting score of that skill for your character. In the classic version of the game, primary skills start at 25, majors at 15, minors at 10, and miscellaneous at 0. You can later make a background choice that will modify a skill. If you don't, every skill will randomly be increased from 3 to 6 points. Primaries, majors, and minors are also used to calculate when your character will level up, but more about leveling later. In Daggerfall Unity, the starting values are a little different. The engine rolls values from 28 to 31 for primary skills, 18 to 21 for major skills, 13 to 16 for minor skills, and 3 to 6 for miscellaneous skills, then adds any bonuses from background on top of these values. It leads to a slightly higher starting values and a lower maximum level, but I find this difference negligible. Max level in Daggerfall is 32, reached by carefully managing your skill increases. I ended my major playthrough at level 22, and Alok was an absolute beast since about half of that level. I can't see the appeal of grinding to reach level 32. It doesn't add anything to the game experience. It most assuredly detracts from it. As said, there are 35 skills, and I won't drag this out by describing all of them, since a lot are self-explanatory and others pretty much useless. I mean, it's pretty clear what climbing and swimming do, as well as that if you want to use a broadsword, you should rely on Longblade. Also, quite a few skills are useless, like all the language ones. Orcish, Spriggan and the others have a slight chance to pacify an enemy member of that race when you interact with them. It's not useful in dungeons, and I've never found a quest that required me to placate an orc or a Spriggan. Lockpicking is also useless, since you can bash open anything that's locked with just a little wear on your weapon as a result. Social skills like etiquette or streetwise work when talking to someone in a polite or blunt manner, but as I explained before, they are not really meaningful. There are also traces of non-implemented skills in the game files, like these guys. Most likely, this broad gap in skills utility is due to many ideas being left out or cut from the final version of the game. Some skills are passive, others are active. To increase Longblade, you need to hit someone with a sword. The medical skill is completely passive instead, being used when you rest to heal. Skill tests are not transparent, meaning you don't have a clear test to pass to succeed. You just do something, and it works or it doesn't. You don't have a log to check. The game may apply some bonuses or maluses to a skill check you're making, but you're none the wiser. It's generally known to consider the skill percentile an accurate chance of success in a test. Skills can reach a max value of 100, like attributes, but magic can raise them over this cap. You cannot max all of them because Daggerfall uses a really weird way of capping your skills. I can't really imagine how they came up with this, unless they were thoroughly wasted at a company's party. When a primary skill reaches 100, it's considered mastered, and all the other skills will then be capped at 95. But this rule exists only for primary skills, meaning that if you reach 100 in any other skill that's not primary, this rule is not applied. For example, I had the alteration skill as a major skill with Aluk and reached 100 by chance. It didn't count towards capping all the other skills at 95 because it's not a primary, so later I could master my Longblade skill, taking it to 100. You can see how this super weird system can be exploited to reach that level 32 I talked about, but I don't think it's worth it. Then, after choosing your custom class skills, you may choose special advantages or disadvantages in a GURPS-like manner. In the skill advancement for class column, you see a dagger initially pointing at average. The more advantages you take, the more that dagger climbs up. increasing the difficulty for your custom class to advance its skills. Disadvantages will lower the dagger. The goal is to incorporate advantages and disadvantages so that, at the end, the dagger won't be too far from average. There are a lot of bonuses and maluses you can choose. For example, if you want to make your character clad in heavy armor, banish it from using light ones. Increased magery is an advancement that almost any character wants, unless you plan on not using magic at all in your playthrough, something I don't suggest. Depending on the class you chose, if you took a pre-made one, your spell points might be your intelligence score times 0.5, 1, 1.5, 2, or even 3. If you're making a custom class and want to use spells, at least the utility ones, I strongly suggest taking the increased magery advantage. Those spell points are never enough. You can create pretty broken builds with a custom class. The theory crafting on it is wild. In the classic version of Daggerfall, a common exploit was to choose the High Elf race, which is immune to paralysis, and give yourself the disadvantage of a critical weakness to paralysis. You're still immune, but with much more leeway for advantages. In Daggerfall Unity, this exploit has been fixed, lowering the High Elf paralysis resistance from 100% to 50%. I guess they didn't want to see only High Elves everywhere. You can also increase your max hit points per level at a pretty steep cost. Then you can edit your reputations with merchants, peasants, scholars, nobility, or the underworld. The sum must always be 0, so if you increase one, you have to lower another faction. It's nice from a role-playing point of view, but mechanically is largely useless. Now we're almost done. We can choose our character background by automatically generating it, or answer another 12 questions to decide important career paths. The only important one is the one that gives you an ebony dagger at character creation, so you can hurt enemies that are invulnerable to lower tier weapons. And there's a frigging imp in the starting dungeon, which is immune to your starting iron weapons. On the UESP website, there's the whole list with the questions and what the answers will net you. So go wild and create the most min-maxed character ever. Most of the answers are not important, giving reputation bonuses, language skill bonuses, or useless objects. Take the skill increases you're interested in and the ebony dagger. Then choose your character name and your face sprite from a few options. Roll some bonus points in your attributes, save the roll, rinse and repeat. Distribute some more points in your various skills. And now another weird option. The game wants you to choose your reflexes level. It was intended to determine how quickly your enemy moves and attacks, and how fast your character gains skill levels. Sadly, in the classic version, enemies always attack at the maximum speed, and this has been fixed in Daggerfall Unity. If you want a modern gaming experience, choose very high reflexes. Otherwise, use it as an accessibility tool to enjoy the game following your needs. Finally, review your character and start the game. It's true that some chunks of this character creation experience are not very useful in the actual game, but it's also true that this system is very powerful and allows the creation of an incredible variety of characters. It's one of the most powerful Daggerfall tools indeed, allowing you to create and play some very particular characters. If you have a character vision in mind, there's a good chance that Daggerfall will let you create it. So go on, start a new adventure. The progression system in Daggerfall is weird, another one of those mechanics that I can't fathom how they were conceived. Bethesda created a pretty classic experience points system for Arena, a system similar to D&D, kill monsters, gain XP, and level up. At level up, you distributed a random number of attribute points, and you were set. For Daggerfall, they decided to completely overhaul the system. Levels are still there, but you gain them by practicing your skills. Like an artisan gets better by practicing their trade day by day. If you played Skyrim or Oblivion, you're familiar with the concept. Hit enough enemies with your sword, and your long blade skill in Daggerfall will rise. Jump a million times, and the same thing happens with your jumping skill. This system leads to some hilarious moments aimed at increasing a specific skill, like always jumping when running, or creating specific low-power spells with the Spellmaker that you can cast in rapid succession to increase your schools of magic. The leveling by doing logic is something I can get behind. I like it. The weird part is that you calculate when a character gains a level, the game uses a strange formula that considers your 3 primary skills, the 2 highest major skills, and the highest minor skill. Every time a skill increases, the system checks if the character is ready to level up. If the formula gives a result higher than the character's current level, the character levels up. I won't bore you with the formula, I don't think it's useful for the purpose of this video. In practice, your character levels up every 15 points gained across the 6 skills the system considers. The exception is leveling from 1 to 2, which requires only 2 points gained among those skills. Every time a character levels up, they gain from 4 to 6 attribute points to freely distribute, and their maximum hit points increase. This increase is calculated randomly, considering your class hit points roll and adding your endurance bonus. Again, I don't think explaining this formula in detail is terribly helpful. Another integral part of the progression system is finding better equipment, which I'll discuss in detail later. As your character levels up, you'll find weapons and armors made of different, increasingly powerful materials. In a way not all that different from Arena, you'll encounter monsters that are impervious to damage done, with weapons below a certain material threshold. For example, leeches can only be hurt by mithril or superior weapons, just like in Arena. Different materials for armors will increase their armor rating and weight, except for shields, which are not influenced by materials. And it's kind of a pity not having a progression for shields too. In the early game, you'll find lower tier materials, like armors or weapons made of iron. As you level up at certain milestones, you'll start finding items of superior materials in dungeons and stores, gradually improving to steel, silver, and so on, until you finally find ebony and the most powerful daedric material. Never neglect visiting shops. I completed my daedric set not only from loot, but also from painstakingly scouring all kinds of merchants in the big cities. I discovered too late that the shop's inventory is generated when you enter its door, so you can save outside, enter, browse, and if you're looking for something specific, abuse the system by reloading until the shop sells the item you want. Also, don't forget that in any shop, different sets of shelves have a different inventory. You may have heard that Daggerfall has a huge game map, so much so that it was the biggest game world for many years. Huge may not even be appropriate, it's gigantic. But is its content meaningful? While Arena had you travel across all of Tamriel, fast traveling was required. You could not go by foot from one point of interest to another, because the procedural generation would keep generating the countryside in a loop, and you'd never reach your destination. Sometimes it even bugged out. In Daggerfall, it's entirely possible to reach a town, a dungeon, or any point of interest on the map by foot, horse, or fast travel. But the sheer size of the map practically demands the fast travel system every time. The Iliac base lies between two imperial provinces, High Rock and Amberfell, setting the game in a narrower zone of the Empire. This region doesn't span the entirety of Tamriel like Arena's world map did, but Daggerfall's map is far more detailed. It's estimated to be roughly the size of the entire Great Britain. There are different estimates and marketing claims, but at the end of the day it doesn't matter. It's insanely huge. The map includes 15,000 cities, towns, settlements, and dungeons. You can select one of the numerous kingdoms in the area, and the game map will zoom in to show all the points of interest, divided by color. You can see towns, dungeons, temples, and isolated homesteads. Notably, the YouTube channel How Big Is the Map started at the far southeastern corner of the playable map and walked to the far northwestern corner entirely by foot, without using horses or boats, crossing the mainland. It took them 69 hours, nice, and 33 minutes. For a debatable comparison, since the calculation method isn't very clear, the Skyrim map is smaller than the Isle of Bethany. Of course, we can ask ourselves, does size really matter in RPG maps? For me, Oblivion or Skyrim's maps were interesting to explore because I could find handcrafted points of interest in every direction, and there were developers placed encounters on the roads. Daggerfall fills this insanely big map with procedural generation. Everything in the game is procedurally generated except for the main quest locations and the capital cities. The map has been generated during development, likely because it was the only way to fill such a large space. Every playthrough has the same map layout. You'll most likely exploit this when looking for witches' covens to summon a Daedra prince for artifact quests. Julian Lefay said that procedural generation is a gradient, with two extremes, generating everything from an algorithm or doing everything by hand. The choice they made was to create the tiles and house interiors by hand, and use procedural generation to put them together. I have to say there is not much in those houses or dungeon tiles. The furniture is bare bones. It feels like playing Hero Quest, but we also have to place Daggerfall in its time context. For that time, it wasn't bad, generating almost an entire world from an algorithm is one of Daggerfall's most impressive features, and at the same time, one of its biggest weaknesses. It's interesting at first to choose a random direction, walk it, and see what you find, but after a while, everything feels almost empty and samey. You can find a random dungeon or settlement and enjoy the scenery, but eventually, like Arena on a much larger scale, all of it blends into the background. If you walk by foot or use a cart or horse to manually travel the world, it's great for the fantasy life simulation aspect, but the wilderness is mostly empty and random monster encounters are quite rare. There are different terrain types: mountains, plains, deserts, tropical regions, and it's genuinely interesting to see them for the first time, but after a while they start to lose their charm. And as a fun observation, for such a grand world with so many cities and kingdoms, there are no roads. For such a warring setting, they didn't think a way to transport resources and troops was necessary. Or maybe procedurally building a coherent network wasn't feasible for them at the time. It's quite a difficult task to do. Of course, to traverse such a big map in a reasonable amount of time, they had to include some form of fast travel, and they leaned heavily on the simulation aspect again. When you select a kingdom and a destination, or search for a specific name using the Find button, the fast travel UI appears. Fast travel is one of Daggerfall's features that really stuck with me. It's simple, but offers options that I haven't found in any other RPG. You can filter destinations by type, or if a quest sends you to a specific location, just search for it. Daggerfall Unity also has a feature that lets you fast travel by clicking on a destination name in your quest journal. It's quite handy. Once you set your destination, you choose your speed. Traveling cautiously preserves health, fatigue, and spell points, and you'll arrive during daytime. Traveling recklessly doesn't preserve your bars and may have you arrive at any time, even in the middle of the night. Reckless travel is faster, useful when a quest is nearing expiration. Choosing to travel by foot, horse, or ship affects travel time, especially when crossing the bay. Taking a ship increases the travel cost. You also choose whether to stop for the night at inns or camp out. Staying at inns reduces travel time, but has a small cost. You'll see the travel cost and time at the bottom of the window before committing. This system is nice and pertinent to the simulation aspect, but managing my quest times, I rarely needed to travel recklessly. Travel costs are usually negligible after the immediate beginning, when you have very little money. Another fun fact, if you are a member of a knightly order, you don't pay for staying at inns. If you buy a ship, you don't pay the associated costs when traversing the bay. Considering the ship's cost though, you'll never recover the investment. A ship, like buying a house, is mostly a flex. You can store loot in containers, but that's it. Houses are expensive. It's like buying property in Los Angeles. Can I move to Arkansas, please? I like it more there anyway. Banks let you store gold, which has weight, so you can carry it all. I don't like when RPGs give weight to your money. I understand they're coins and coins have weight, but it just leads to a lot of boring trips to the bank. Banks also provide letters of credit and loans. If you don't repay a loan in time, you're pursued. And the common exploit is to go to a kingdom with no main story ties, take a big loan, and skip the country entirely. Banks also sell ships and houses at absurd prices, probably due to conflicts of interest. Having the money lender and the realtor in the same institution is not a great deal. Quests or exploration will send you to settlements ranging from small cluster of houses to huge cities. When searching for a specific house in a small settlement, it's easier to use the info interaction mode on every house rather than asking the half dozen residents, who may not help. Using this mode automatically marks the house on your map. The dialogue system appears complex, with a plethora of arguments and trees, adding to the simulation. In reality, it's mostly used to ask for directions, find a person or building, or seek work. You can ask politely, based on the etiquette skill, normally, based on the personality attribute, or bluntly, based on the streetwise skill. Most people will tell you to get lost, making the system frustrating. In the original game, you could annotate city maps like in Arena, but not in Daggerfall Unity. Instead, DFU allows you to annotate dungeon maps, which is useful. Annotating city maps isn't critical, as using info mode and entering buildings automatically marks them. Special buildings are color-coded: orange for shops, green for inns, and blue for guilds. If the city gates are closed, you can climb walls or levitate over them. The guards won't mind. If a shop or guild isn't open, you can loiter to pass time. Do not rest on streets. Guards will intervene. Renting an inn room is cheap. and you may wake up in a different room than where you slept. The same thing happened in Arena, and I found it hilarious. Climbing can be used on any vertical surface, like city walls, houses, and dungeons. Approach a vertical surface and keep walking. After a moment, you'll enter climbing mode, and your climbing skill affects success. Since failing to climb when you're already pretty high on a surface can lead to a disastrous fall, I found the levitate spell more reliable. You just have to keep an eye on its duration. As a final note on big cities, their building placement can be confusing, especially when exteriors and interiors use the same assets, such as the Knights of the Dragon buildings in Daggerfall City. Once, I was wondering why one of their NPCs was not recognizing the completion of a quest I just did for them, asking myself if I bumped into a bug. It was late in the night and I was tired, so I didn't notice that I walked into the second Knights of the Dragon building in Daggerfall, which is identical to the other one on the exterior and the interior, even to the single NPCs and their placement. Dungeons are another beast, and a major Daggerfall peculiarity. Quests often send you to gigantic subterranean dungeons or fortresses. Their entrances usually look like doors on mounds, keeps, hollowed trees, or ruins. Multiple entrances map to the same exit, and vice versa. If I can give you a suggestion, never enter these dungeons without the recall spell. Mark the entrance and recall when you completed your quest, or when you're full of loot. These dungeons are huge, confusing, and in the original game often bugged. Ted Peterson said, "We probably didn't need to have all our dungeons be quite so sadistically big." No, Ted, you didn't. Huge dungeons tied to the main quest may be interesting, but multi-hour dungeons for random quests are frustrating, especially when objectives are bugged. Randomly generated guild quests might ask you to kill someone or fetch an item from the depths of the dungeon. The problem is, that person, monster, or object could spawn outside the dungeon, under the terrain, or in a secret room that ends up being unreachable. Thankfully, the Daggerfall Unity team pulled off an impressive feat. They fixed all these bugs, and dungeons now work properly in this version of the game. If you didn't already respect these guys, you should now. I delved into plenty of dungeons, and whenever I couldn't find my quest objective, it was my own fault. Sometimes a trigger was hidden in a strange piece of dungeon decor, like a torch or lantern, a random skull turned out to be a switch, or a button was tucked behind a chair, things like that. The dungeons are still insanely big though, so if you're feeling burned out, I suggest turning on the smaller dungeons option in DFU. To be honest, it doesn't hurt the experience at all. These places are still large enough to be enjoyable and rewarding, but they're limited to a central block and the surrounding perimeter ones. All dungeons are built from blocks, with up to 32 arranged in a 2D grid. There are two types of blocks, internal and border. Internal blocks form the core of a dungeon and have two openings on each side, one above the other since the blocks are 3D. Each opening links to another internal or border block. Border blocks surround the internals and usually consist of corridors connecting entrances or isolated rooms. You can view the overall grid layout of a dungeon on the dungeon map, which shows internal and border blocks in different colors. The rest of the dungeon map is a 3D representation of the areas you've explored, and for its time, it's an impressive feature. Sadly, given how labyrinthine these places are, it often gets confusing. Dungeons use different block types and textures to add variety. Caves, castle interiors, crypts, and so on. There aren't that many though, so after a while they get repetitive. You'll even start to recognize blocks and remember where the secret passages and switches are. And there are plenty of them. Secret doors, teleporters, trapdoors, underwater tunnels, pits, and more. Some are easy to spot, but others are ridiculously well hidden. Having water breathing and levitate spells helps a lot, especially since these places have surprising verticality. Dungeon type and your character's level determine what enemies you'll face. Daggerfall scales enemies with your level up to a point. After level 17, scaling stops, so whether you're level 18 or 20, the same types of monsters will appear. Don't worry about locked doors, you can bust them open with your weapon, which makes the lockpicking skill basically useless. Your weapon will degrade slightly, but not as badly as in Arena. If you're less violence prone, you can always use the open spell. If a door still won't budge, it means it's tied to a switch somewhere else. Bummer. You'll rest a lot in this game, especially in dungeons, to recover health, stamina, and magic points. Thankfully, unlike in Arena, you don't need to find raised platforms. You can rest anywhere as long as no enemies are nearby. If one is, just walk away and try again. Sometimes random enemies will spawn on you while resting, so it's best not to be on your last legs before doing it. Exiting and re-entering a dungeon respawns its enemies and treasure piles. And since you'll be hoarding loot like a dragon, buy a cart and learn the recall spell, cast Mark at the dungeon entrance, and recall when you want to leave or unload your haul. Daggerfall lets you buy a wagon at general stores, and it always travels with you. When you interact with the dungeon exit, the game asks if you want to leave or access your wagon. This lets you dump everything inside, since its weight limit is very generous, and you can keep delving. Honestly, this is awesome. I was the kind of pen and paper kid who, after killing a dragon in D&D, would hire people with carts just to empty the entire hoard. Having a video game that lets me do the same thing, fill a cart, haul it to town, and cash in, is totally amazing. If there is one legacy other RPGs should take from Daggerfall, it's the cart. I'm joking, but not really. Main quest dungeons are still massive, but they're handcrafted and often have unique themes and characters. Sometimes you'll need to revisit them several times. Shidungeon is pretty straightforward once you know the password to Nulfaga's room, but the Rani Tower was a nightmare, and the number of times you have to return to Medora felt a bit much. I'm most likely butchering all these names, but there is no pronunciation guide, so you'll have to deal with it. Also, why is their tower still crawling with undead after we lifted the curse? I even tried placing a mark and recall to her room, but I couldn't get out again because it was locked behind a secret door with the switch on the other side. It's even noted on the UESP page. If only I read it sooner. And this is all part of the main story, damn it. It's not randomly generated stuff. I sometimes wondered how this game was tested. Combat is not too dissimilar from Arena. In Melee, you swing your weapon in front of your character by dragging the mouse on the screen, and different directions translate into different types of attacks. Diagonal and horizontal slashes, vertical chops, and thrusts forward. They all have different modifiers for damage and accuracy, but honestly, it doesn't change that much. If an enemy is too strong for you, strategically varying your attacks probably won't save you. Daggerfall Unity allows you to maintain the vanilla attack system, but also implements the click or hold methods. With the hold option, you simulate the original game by keeping the attack button held and moving the mouse in a specific direction to initiate an attack. The click option is more like later Elder Scrolls games. A single click on a target performs a basic attack, eliminating the need to swing your mouse in different directions. For ranged attacks, you draw the bow by holding down your attack button, aim, and then release it to fire an arrow at your target. I haven't noticed any real differences with gesture-based moves, if they exist for the bow, and the original game manual seems to imply they don't. The downside is that, unlike in Arena, you now have to buy or find arrows and carry them with you, and you burn through them fast. To cast a spell, you first prepare it by opening your spellbook and selecting the desired spell. In the original game, depending on the view option, the spell is fired either at the X cursor or at the center of the screen. There are dedicated buttons to keep casting the last selected spell or to cancel it, usually Q and E, though I changed them immediately for a more modern key setup. To the best of my knowledge, dual wielding offers no real benefit, since you can only use one weapon at a time, even if you can switch between them, so it's generally better to have a shield or use a two-handed weapon. The biggest difference from Arena is that combat now relies heavily on your character skills, like Longblade if you're using a broadsword, archery for bows, or distraction for offensive spells. At the beginning, you'll miss often, even if the animation seems to imply a hit, because attacks are chance-based and calculated behind the scenes. It's not as frustrating as in Morrowind, but it can still be challenging early on. Armor rating reduces the likelihood of being hit in combat, but it does not reduce the damage received. When an enemy attacks, the game first calculates which body part is targeted. Different parts have different probabilities, but diving too deep into the details here might be a bit much. After determining the target, the game checks if the attack hits, factoring in the armor rating for that body part. In the original game, there is an inconsistency between the armor rating shown on the character's paper doll individual armor pieces in the inventory, which Daggerfall Unity has corrected. Shields have their own separate system. They increase the armor rating of specific body parts depending on the shield type, but unlike armor, the material does not matter. Bucklers, round, kite, and tower shields provide increasing armor ratings to a progressively larger number of body parts. Again, I don't want to go too deep into the details here, or this video will get too hard to follow. Let's just say that Bethesda clearly leaned on the simulation aspect here, perhaps excessively. Many players likely never noticed the shield mechanic while playing. Common combat strategies include backing up when an enemy animation indicates an attack, then striking before they can attack again, using spell absorption or spell reflection against magic-focused enemies like orc shamans, liches, and vampires, and exploiting AI quirks, such as enemies getting stuck in corners or staircases. Sneaking takes into consideration a series of variables, like your stealth skill, line of sight, if you're crouching or not. Sometimes enemies won't detect you even if you're you're not actively crouching, allowing for backstabs with increased damage. Like in old Elder Scrolls games, combat in Daggerfall is not the deepest mechanic they developed. It entirely relies on your character skills rather than player skills. Swing your weapon, shoot an arrow, or cast a spell and move to avoid attacks. That's the essence of combat. Hoarding better equipment also helps. Let me talk about crime in this combat section, since it's easy to find yourself fighting guards if you go down the crime route. As soon as you're caught committing a crime, city guards spawn and attack you. You can turn yourself in or resist arrest. Resisting and escaping damages your regional reputation. Submitting to arrest initiates a trial. The judge reads the charges and assigns a punishment. Pleading guilty results in a lesser sentence, while pleading not guilty lets you argue your case or lie your way out. These options rely on your etiquette or streetwise skills respectively, with outcomes influenced by your reputation and any support from the Thieves Guild or Dark Brotherhood if you're a member. Punishments can include fines or jail time. Jail doesn't affect skills or experience like it does in the series' later games, but may cause quests to fail due to their time limits, which can also harm your reputation. Upon death, a cutscene plays in which your character is entombed by a group of mages, under the watchful gaze of Tamriel's twin moons. In Daggerfall, like in most RPGs, equipment is a huge part of character progression. Opening your inventory greets you with a paper doll of your character, similar to Arena but far more functional. You can stack clothing under armor and cloaks over it. Armor rating is now intuitive. Better armor increases your rating instead of decreasing it like in Arena. Higher armor reduces the chance of being hit, like armor class in D&D, but it doesn't reduce the damage you take. There are 7 armor pieces you can wear: helm, cuirass, right and left pauldron, gauntlets, greaves, and boots. They can be made from 12 different materials. Leather and chain count as materials themselves and sit at the low end, so only heavy armor uses superior metals. This matters if you choose a pre-made class that can't wear heavy armor, or if you choose to not wear heavy armor as a disadvantage. Materials also affect weapons, giving bonuses to hit and damage. Certain monsters can only be armed by specific metals or better, like werewolves taking damage only from silver or higher. Better armor and weapons appear in loot or shops depending on your level. Daedric gear shows up in shops around level 7 and in loot a bit later, around level 8 or 9. The inventory screen is surprisingly deep. Jewelry slots sit on the left. You can wear 2 of each type, and enchanting them all gives a huge power spike once you can make your own magic items. The central column shows your backpack, filtered by buttons for weapons and armor, magic items, clothing and miscellaneous, and ingredients. Another column has buttons to manipulate items, with the exception of the wagon one, which shows your cart contents in the far right column. The last column, when not used for the wagon, shows what's on the ground or in containers, letting you pick up or drop loot. I try to be honest with you, so in full disclosure, I'll say that talking about Daggerfall's main story is the most difficult part of this retrospective and analysis. The story isn't linear, and its quests are linked through various dependencies. Quests you've completed before, level requirements, and reputation requirements with specific NPCs or factions. I tried to map it out in a logical way, and ended up with an 8-page explanation that was incredibly dry. So, forgive me for scrapping that, and instead choosing to narrate, so to speak, what happens by following the game's own narrative. The game itself doesn't do a great job of connecting the dots, and if you're not meticulous about taking notes and reading the in-game lore books, you'll likely miss important pieces. On top of that, the same main quest can be triggered and completed in different orders, or outright failed if you say the wrong thing, hand a crucial item to the wrong faction, or simply lose track of events. Forgive me for being blunt, but this is not a game designed with today's younger audiences in mind, as it emphasizes patience and attention to detail. It's easy to make mistakes, lose track of events, and compromise your whole playthrough, at least in terms of the main quest. To make things even murkier, lore books and even the official Daggerfall guide, the Daggerfall Chronicles, also called Codex Scientia II, are written by unreliable narrators tied to one faction or another, blending historical chronicles with propaganda. This adds to immersion, but it can also create a bit of confusion. In case you still have doubts, I'm going to spoil the main story for an almost 30-year-old game. And yes, I'll be butchering a lot of names along the way. Let's start by going back a few years before our character steps in. Deliac Bay lies between the Imperial Province of High Rock to the north and Hammerfell to the south. At this point, neither province is unified. They're split into numerous kingdoms, each a city-state. The major players in the bay are the kingdoms of Daggerfall and Wayrest, both in High Rock, and the Kingdom of Sentinel in Hammerfell. The War of Bethany began in the year 402 of the Third Era, between Daggerfall and Sentinel. Bethany is the strategically located island at the mouth of the bay, and both powers claimed it. Daggerfall declared that Lord Mogreff of Bethany had asked King Lysandus of Daggerfall for protection against pirates and bandits. King Cameron of Sentinel, citing a 200-year-old contract that supposedly granted Bethany to his kingdom, declared war. Despite the supposed Redgar's martial prowess, more on this 2 games later, the early war heavily favored Daggerfall. Victories came both at sea and on high rock soil, led by King Lysandus, his son and heir Gothrid, and Lord Bridwell of the Knights of the Dragon. A knightly order you can actually join in-game. I did. Meanwhile, Daggerfall's court was unraveling in the absence of its leaders. Queen Minisera, Lysandus' wife, discovered he was having an affair with the court sorceress Medora Direni. Furious, she banished Medora and cursed her, trapping her on Direni Tower on the Isle of Balfiera. This will matter later. At the same time, Lysandus' mother, the necromancer and mystic Nulfaga, had a vision foretelling her son's death if the war continued. Facing strong opposition in court, she left for her fortress Shidunjant, leaving her dragon behind to watch over things. She too will become important later. Despite his battlefield successes, Lysandus was convinced to negotiate peace. Yes, I had doubts, so I revisited the intro to check how the Emperor pronounces the king's name. Talks with King Cameron initially went well, but collapsed when the written treaty failed to match the earlier agreements. Which points caused the collapse depends on which propaganda you read, and they aren't important for us. In the year 403, the armies clashed at the Battle of Cringane Field. It was a massacre. King Lysandus was killed, and his son Gothrid was crowned on the battlefield, before leading Daggerfall to final victory over Sentinel. King Cameron also died, though records disagree on how. A fragile peace followed, cemented by Gothrid's marriage to Princess Aubki, Cameron's daughter. 2 years later, our character enters the story. Though never explicitly called so, he is a Blade agent, an agent of the Imperial Intelligence Service, and is summoned late at night by Emperor Uriel Septim VII himself, the same emperor we saved in the previous game. The game manual contains a beautifully written version of this meeting, but let's look at the introductory cutscene, which has some surprisingly strong acting.
Excuse the gloom, but none may know of this meeting. The nature of my trouble is darker still. Over a year ago, King Lysandus of Daggerfall died honorably on the field of battle. He was as loyal a subject, ally, and friend as you are. I did grieve for him, but his spirit does not rest. With a spectral army, he haunts his former kingdom, crying for revenge. I do not know why a good and loyal man would be so cursed. Perhaps you can find the answer and close the marble jaws of oblivion, bringing peace to his soul. I ask this as your emperor and your friend. I have one lesser request. Several years ago, I wrote a letter to the Queen of Daggerfall. It never arrived. The letter was of a sentimental and personal nature. If you find and destroy that letter, I will be grateful. Now, my champion, rest well this night, for tomorrow you sail for the kingdom of Daggerfall.
The Emperor is played by John Gilbert, who sadly passed away in 2006. Okato of Firsthold, the Imperial Battle Mage, was played by a programmer whose name I couldn't confirm. Aside from the Imperial Battle Mage try to impress us with a simple cantrip, the mission is clear. Discover what curse binds King Lysandus' ghost to haunt Daggerfall, crying for vengeance each night, and recover a letter of sentimental value that the Emperor sent to Queen Minisvera. At first, I assumed this meant there was a secret affair between the Emperor and Lysandus' wife, but I was wrong, very wrong. Our ship to the Iliac Bay is, of course, caught in a storm. Our character barely survives, swimming to a cave that becomes our first dungeon, Privateer's Hold. A landslide blocks the exit, forcing us to fight our way through. This tutorial dungeon throws tough enemies at new players. The skeleton is a serious challenge at level 1, and the imp is immune to iron and steel weapons, unless you started with the ebony dagger. Much like Arena, it is a punishing introduction. I'm not sure how this design helped sell the game, but it was a different time. After surviving, we receive a letter from Lady Brisiena, a blade agent who offers to guide us. This marks the beginning of a long series of missives from various senders, all delivered by seemingly all-knowing couriers who manage to find you anywhere. The game leans a bit too heavily on this trick. Meeting Lady Brisiena is optional, and you only have 30 in-game days to do it. She'll extend the deadline once, but if you ignore her, you lose the quest. From here, I'll summarize rather than exhaustively detail every main storyline step. For both our sakes, the main story has us gain the favors of the three ruling families of Daggerfall, Wayrest, and Sentinel. While Wayrest appeared neutral during the war, we soon discover it wasn't. Espionage, conspiracies, and assassination attempts follow us constantly as we dig deeper. At first, we may encounter Lysandus' ghost alongside Wraith in Daggerfall at night. After helping one of Sentinel's princes discover what happened to his poor brother, we are tasked to steal magical painting for Queen Akorithi. Looking at it reveals a shocking scene. A man in Wayrest regalia stabs a man wearing Daggerfall's coat of arms. Was the assassinated man Lysandus? Didn't he die in battle? We have to dig more. We then visit the Rani Tower, lifting Queen Minisera's curse on the sorceress Medora. She is still in love with the dead king, and knows how to prepare a particular dust to sprinkle on his remains to placate him. She doesn't know where to find this dust though, and sends us to Gortwog, leader of the orcs. He tells us Lysandus supported the orcs' claim to become citizens of the Empire, and provides the location of a dungeon on the Isle of Balfiera, where we can find the dust to placate the king's spirit. He does so in exchange for Medora's support to the orcs' claim. We recover the dust, finding it wrapped in a parchment that reveals how Gortwog knew about the assassination attempt on Lysandus, and tried to stop it to gain even more favor, but failed. Returning to Medora is no easy task, as the Rani Tower is still full of undead, despite our lifting the curse. Anyway, we make the journey and give her the dust to prepare. She needs almost a full month, meaning another trip to the tower will be necessary. I didn't fully appreciate this design choice to have us come back to the same dungeon 3 times, fighting the same enemies. When the dust is finally ready, she reveals that the monument to Lysandus at Kringane Field is an empty tomb, and she doesn't know the actual location where the body was buried. In exchange for a favor for an agent of the Underking, a mysterious figure known only through whispers, we are directed to the real royal tomb in Menevia. After finding Lysandus' remains and performing the ritual, his ghost confirms he was murdered by Lord Woodburn of Wayrest, the very man from the painting.
You soothe my rage. I do not seek to be placated. I seek vengeance upon he who slew me. If you would truly lay my spirit to rest, be the instrument of my vengeance against Lord Woodbourne of Wayrest.
To give the ghost peace, we decide to deal with Lord Woodburn in a permanent manner.
King Mistandis is at last able to rest. The wraiths and ghosts of his loyal soldiers vanish as the soul passes to the underworld, leaving the city of Daggerfall to the living.
Meanwhile, the trail of the Emperor's letter leads us through layers of political drama. A servant tells us that the letter was received by Queen Abuki, and that the Dowager Queen Minisera never got it. The original courier couldn't deliver the letter due to the ongoing war, so the task was delegated to a local courier of the Knights of the Dragon Order. We track her down, and she insists she deliver the letter to the Queen of Daggerfall. Here's the catch. The Emperor had addressed the letter to the Queen of Daggerfall, who was Minisera at the time, but by the time this frigging letter arrived, Lysandus was dead, and the Queen of Daggerfall was now his son's wife, Aubki. Bureaucratic mistakes at their finest. Eventually, we learn the Thieves Guild stole the letter, and Gortwog bought it. He's willing to give it to us, but first we must prove ourselves against his warriors in the Orcs' fortress. I find it ironic that he's fighting for his people's emancipation by having them slaughtered at every opportunity. When we finally retrieve it, we discover it wasn't a love affair at all, but a plea. Lord Woodburn had come into possession of a powerful relic, the Totem of Tiber Septim. The Emperor wanted Queen Minisera to intercede and deliver the relic to Lady Brisiena, the Blade agent who first contacted us at the beginning of our adventure in the Iliac Bay. From here, the threads converge. Every major faction, from Daggerfall to Wayrest, Sentinel, the Orcs, the Emperor, the Underking, and even the King of Worms, wants the totem. Each one contacts us by letter, trying to convince us to deliver it to them through bribes, threats, lofty ideals, and so on. But they also explain that the artifact controls Numidium, the massive dwarven construct Tiber Septim once used to conquer and unite Tamriel. Whoever controls it can dominate the Empire. Lady Brisiena discovers that the totem is now in possession of Gothrid, the new king of Daggerfall, and it's up to us to recover it. It's striking to learn of this connection between Lysandus' son and the man who murdered him. In the game, it's all murky. Some explanations come from external books, but I don't want to get into too many details from outside sources. According to those, Lysandus planned to fake his own death and run away with Medora, but in the end was killed by Woodburn. A few things don't add up though, like Gothrid's reaction if you expose the truth to him. In a wonderful Ned Stark with Cersei moment, he tries to cover everything up and have us killed, which makes me believe he was part of the conspiracy from the beginning. Also, he receives an incredible powerful artifact from his father's killer. Anyway, we steal the totem from Daggerfall's treasury, and I don't know why it looks like a swaddled infant. Now we must decide who gets it, effectively choosing the game's ending. There are 7 possible outcomes, depending on whom you choose to support. Loyalist characters can give it to the Blades, my favorite ending by the way, rebels to the Underking, opportunists to one of the 3 major kingdoms, or even to the King of Worms. Nothing bad can happen if you give it to a powerful necromancer, right? I'm going to explain all those factions in detail later, don't worry. I'm just trying to stick with the main story here, which is already pretty convoluted. The story ends with the final journey into the Mantellan Crux, a unique 6-level dungeon filled with puzzles, powerful enemies, and even an encounter with the Sheogorath himself. In the end, we recover the Mantella, Numidium's power source. Now, I don't want this to turn into an Elder Scrolls lore video, but I think it's interesting and useful for the story to explain what the Mantella really is, since the game doesn't exactly do it unless you choose a specific ending. The Mantella is a massive soul gem, imbued with the life force of Tiber Septim's personal battle mage, Zurin Arctus, who had a change of heart after Tamriel's conquest and tried to stop Tiber Septim and Numidium's destruction. In attempting to remove the Mantella from the construct, Arctus ended up destroying both the construct and himself. The gem was then flung into the realm of Aetherius, where we later recovered it after being sent there by Nulfaga. Zurin Arctus remained in a kind of slumber within a subterranean vault, waiting to reclaim his life force from the Mantella, and in his undead form became known as the Underking. In the moment we touch the Mantella, Nulfaga returns us to Tamriel and reveals, through the Book of Time, the consequences of our choice. Essentially, 5 of the 7 endings show the faction we sided with seizing power by destroying the others, even the Orcs, who apparently only wanted the recognition. I'm sorry to cut this short, but these endings are mostly the same, with only the faction changing. The other 2 are far more distinct. In one, the King of Worms uses the Mantella's power to ascend as one of the gods of Oblivion. In the other, the Underking is finally reunited with his lost life force and achieves true death. That's what Daggerfall's endings tell us. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking about the Arcturian heresy and how the Underking became one of the 3 souls that supposedly created Talos. But this is how Daggerfall ends. It was later established that whichever ending you choose is canon. I'm mentioning this briefly for completeness, though technically it takes place after Daggerfall's conclusion. Bethesda introduced the meta-narrative device with the infamous Warp in the West, establishing that on the 9th of Frostfall, in the year 417 of the Third Era, there were 44 city-states in the Iliac Bay. 2 days later, there were only 4, Daggerfall, Sentinel, Wayrest, and Orsinium, all mysteriously united under the Empire. medium, whose pieces had been recovered by the blades before our character's intervention, and which awaited only the totem and the mantella to be reactivated, was both destroyed again and used by every faction simultaneously. This led to the rise of Orsinium and, as many believe, the apotheosis of Talos. After Daggerfall's ending, the 8 divines became 9, and the warp in the west was revealed to be a dragon break, a moment when multiple timelines converge into a single contradictory history. All of this, however, is established in later games, so I won't dwell on it too much. Is all of this confusing? Absolutely. Brilliant? Maybe. Personally, I think it's a clumsy narrative device, used later to force the canon into some semblance of order and retcon certain aspects. I would have preferred a single definitive ending to serve as canon for later installments, as is often the case in video game series. Now, Daggerfall isn't just about the main quest. Most of the game is living the fantasy simulation life. That means, besides exploring, you spend a lot of time on randomly generated quests. You might do them for fun, out of curiosity, to level up skills, earn money for better gear, or find rare loot. Guild quests are especially rewarding because raising your rank unlocks powerful services. If you remember Arena, quests were divided into inn, palace, and artifact types, depending on whether they came from an innkeeper, a noble, or a Daedric artifact hunt. Daggerfall expands this system, offering more organizations to give quests, but the underlying patterns are simpler. Random generation creates NPCs and locations, and tasks usually involve delivering items, retrieving objects from dungeons, freeing captives, killing specific monsters, escorting or protecting someone. The game dresses the chores up nicely. For example, you might be asked to find a rare ingredient in a dungeon to save someone from a curse, or to kill a traitor to your organization that's hiding in yet another dungeon. But after a while, the pattern becomes obvious. I completed around 100 quests, and by the end, they felt like routine chores. For me, the fun came from increasing guild rank or saving up for that Daedric Day katana I wanted to enchant. To do that, I needed rank 5 with the Mages Guild to access the item maker, and that little tease of progression kept me coming back. Quests are traditionally grouped into macro categories depending on the giver: guilds, merchants and innkeepers, nobles, covens, vampire clans, and Daedric quests. The boundaries blur sometimes. What's considered an in-quest might come from a guild member, but the categories help in understanding the quest system. Some quests are more unique, like the Lord Kavar story from the Fighters Guild, or tracking a lost artifact from a knightly order, adding a bit of variety to the usual patterns. Guilds have their specialties. The Dark Brotherhood mostly sends you to assassinate someone, while the Thieves Guild focuses on stealing the city where their hideout is located. Guild buildings are usually marked in blue on city maps, but not these two. They're illegal, so you have to complete an initiation quest to gain entry. Once part of them, a common brown building is automatically marked as the Brotherhood or Thieves' hideout if the town you're in has one. It's a small but immersive detail. You only learn about the underground network by proving yourself to them, and once you're in, you're informed. I like that. It's a pity the requests are all the same though. Witch covens are trickier to find. They're not on the map, and wilderness blocks are huge. Thankfully, their exact locations are now shared online, but you'll still need to search carefully to find the right spot. Once discovered, covens are marked with a black square on the map and offer quests that generally follow the familiar patterns we already mentioned. Covens are also key elements for Daedric quests, which reward powerful artifacts. Summoning a Daedric prince requires a ton of gold and access to a summoner, either at the Mages Guild, a temple, or via Coven Witch. Guild summoners summon specific princes on set days, while witches summon random ones. Exceptions include Sheogorath, who has a 5% chance of appearing each time, or 15% in a storm, and Irsin, who only appears via the Glenmorir witches. The quests themselves usually involve heading into a dungeon, killing a target, or retrieving an item, patterns you'll recognize from many other missions. Vampire quests are delivered monthly to vampire characters. They often involve vampiric-themed tasks, like escorting someone while avoiding vampire hunters. Unfortunately, there are no special quests for lycanthropes. This asymmetry slightly bothers me, but let's move on. Special mention goes to the Cure for Vampirism and Cure for Lycanthropy quests. Vampires must track down and destroy their bloodline father, while lycanthropes receive a letter from a werbeast hunter, giving them a strict deadline to find a cure. To cure yourself, you can talk to a priest and be sent to bite a latent lycanthrope. In doing so, the curse will be transmitted to them, and it will be lifted from you. But this latent lycanthrope happens to be a child. Awakening and then killing them will hurt the original regional reputation. Besides doing a truly horrible deed, I felt the need to clear this part. Or, the Glenmoril witches will send you on a quest to gather ingredients for a cure. I like the fact that this connection between the Glenmoril witches and werewolves will present itself again later in the series. Another pillar of Daggerfall gameplay is the factions. What would this game be without its factions, I wonder? And I don't just mean the guilds. There is a whole web of organizations subtly woven into every region. Most you'll never meet, and often you won't even realize when an NPC belongs to a hidden sub-faction. Almost every action modifies your reputation with some factions, sometimes raising one while lowering another. Even just joining one guild may alienate another faction. This isn't transparent and it's never explained, so unless you constantly check the UESP, you'll most likely wing it. In-game, the only visible reputation is with the guilds your character belongs to. Ted Peterson noted in a recent interview that the system should have been clearer. Players should have some sense of why factions dislike them, but here you don't. It's all utterly complicated, and mostly it's not even that relevant. You just want to be on good terms with the major story factions and the guilds, so the whole system feels just excessive. The major factions that impact the main story are the Kingdoms of Daggerfall, Wayrest, and Sentinel. Orsinium, the Orcs' capital, the Blades, who represent the Emperor's interests, the Underking, and Manimarco, the King of Worms. We've already established that the major city-states are political entities, each furthering its own agenda, even the Orcs. This feels very realistic and I like it. It reflects how real organizations operate. It's a shades of grey type of plot, the kind often used from Shakespeare to Game of Thrones, or A Song of Ice and Fire, if we want to be precise. But I also like a bit of the supernatural in my fantasy games. And Daggerfall delivers that as well, through the King of Worms and the Underking. The problem is that the game does a poor job of presenting them, and it's very easy to confuse the two if you're not paying close attention. The King of Worms is an arch-necromancer who resides in Skorg Barrow, an enormous crypt beyond the Dragontail Mountains. He commands legions of undead, and is involved in the main quest as an information source. Unsurprisingly, he's a shady figure with his own hidden objective, revealed only if you choose to give him the totem, becoming a god. He also despises the Underking, so it's a pretty classic evil powerful wizard who wants even more power. The Underking, as explained earlier, is what remains of Tiber Septim's personal battle mage, Zurin Arctus, after he stopped the Numidium and nearly destroyed himself in the process. I know some of you Elder Scrolls fans are going to say that the real identity of the Underking is not certain, that the Arcturian heresy says it's Izmir Wulfarth and not Zurin Arctus, but the letter you received during the Totem Who Gets the Totem quest by the Underking leaves little doubt. He says, the secret of Numidium's power lies in its heart, carried within the Mantella. It is the heart of Tiber Septim's battle mage. It is my heart. It is my Mantella. It is my totem. It belongs to me and to none other. For me, it's pretty clear and the matter is settled. Without his art, he could neither truly live nor die, but instead existed in a kind of slumber, commanding a vast network of people and undead as his agents. It's unclear whether he is a powerful lich or some other kind of being. If you side with him at the end, he regains his life force and finally dies. Yet, for all his prominence, he's even on a game's box cover. The Underking is mostly just mentioned and plays only a minor role in the main storyline. I even went looking for a lore book I might have missed about him, but in Daggerfall there is none, and the fact that an NPC in one of the main quests outright says the King of Worms and the Underking are supposed to be one and the same only makes things more confusing unless you read their lore on outside sources. For all the effort put into Daggerfall's political drama, the fantasy factions felt poorly presented and underexplained to me. Other non-major storyline factions fall into two groups, joinable and non-joinable. Joinable factions are the guilds, fighters, mages, thieves, the Dark Brotherhood, the temples, and the knightly orders. The Dark Brotherhood and the Thieves Guild have special requirements. The Brotherhood contacts you by letter after you've killed at least 3 innocent citizens or 15 guards. The Thieves Guild requires successfully pickpocketing 10 people or breaking into a store without magic. The other guilds just evaluate your skills. If you meet their minimum requirements when you ask to be admitted, you're accepted. It's basically a quick job interview for a junior position. Each guild values specific skills. The Mages Guild tracks proficiency in all 6 schools of magic: alteration, destruction, illusion, mysticism, restoration, and thaumaturgy. It's also the first time spells were divided this way in the series. It's a historical moment, so to speak. To give another example, the Fighters Guild focuses on archery, axe, blunt weapon, long blade, short blade, and even Giantish and Orcish languages. Guilds pick a high and low skill from your pool for admission and promotion. Though what happens when you exceed these chosen skills values, with the third one that fits their pool is not clear. For example, I entered the Fighter's Guild with the long blade as the high skill and archery as the low one. What if I raise axe over archery? Will the low skill be switched? I'm not sure. Morrowind will make this system way clearer by explicitly stating in your character sheet the requirements you need to meet. Promotions also require raising your reputation by completing quests within their deadlines. Quests have deadlines, and usually are pretty strict. You just have the time to travel to the required location, complete the objective, and come back. If you fail to do so, you lose reputation with the faction giving you the quest. You may even get demoted. It was pretty annoying, so my strategy was to take just one task at a time. Simple but effective. Promotions can occur once every 28 days, and the reputation decays if you neglect the guild. So my other strategy was to gain enough reputation to earn a rank with one guild, then jump to another and do the same. By the time I circled back to the first guild for another promotion, the 28 days had passed. Guild rank is important because it unlocks useful services. The Mage's Guild's Spellmaker is available immediately, but the Item Maker for enchanting is available at rank 6. The Dark Brotherhood grants a Potion Maker at rank 3. Temples offer similar services at ranks 4 to 6. The Fighters Guild provides free lodging, a blacksmith, and discounts on repairs that improve with rank. Nightly orders allow you to stay at inns for free. Not that inns cost much. Also, all guilds offer trainers for their skills of interest. Non-joinable factions include political entities, witch covens, and vampire clans. Political factions are key for the main quest. Some quests require a minimum reputation to trigger, and your choices affect affiliated factions too. Vampire clans are region-based, clearly inspired by the pen and paper Vampire the Masquerade, with 9 bloodlines granting unique perks, though their quests remain generic. They all adhere to the same patterns we already discussed. Characters can become vampires, werewolves, or wereboars. I don't know why they also included the wereboars specifically. It feels D&D inspired, AD&D 2nd edition to be precise, given it was the 90s, but they could add all the other lycanthropes. Anyway, each form grants advantages and disadvantages. I figured to place this part here because vampires have their own factions, depending on clans. Vampires gain plus 20 to all attributes except intelligence, and plus 30 to climbing, critical strike, hand-to-hand, jumping, running, and stealth. They learn the levitation, calm humanoid, and charm mortal spells, plus bloodline-specific spells at 1/4 of the normal spell cost. They're immune to paralysis and disease, but take damage in sunlight or holy areas and must feed every 24 hours. Failure disables resting and fast travel during the day, and all reputations reset, because the character is technically dead. Lycanthropes gain a plus 40 to strength, speed, agility, and endurance, all capped at 100 though, and plus 30 to hand-to-hand, climbing, running, stealth, swimming, jumping, and critical strike. They're immune to disease and iron and steal weapons while transformed. Disadvantages include killing an innocent every 15 days or suffering health penalties, automatic full moon transformations, and the inability to access inventory, buying, and selling when transformed. While role-playing as a vampire or werewolf can be fun, the heavy restrictions make it more of a challenge than a benefit. In my opinion, it's not worth it if you want to finish the game at all. While Daggerfall uses a full 3D engine and improves upon Arena's graphics, it may still appear very obsolete today, even in Daggerfall Unity, which enhances lighting and view distance. DFU is an engine replacement that uses the original game resources, so it won't look drastically different, unless you mod it. I didn't, because better graphics was not what I was looking for in experiencing this game in 2025. However, Daggerfall still looks much better than Arena, more akin to its contemporaries. One aspect that may strike as odd is the stark contrast between the 3D models of the world and the two-dimensional sprites used for creatures, some furniture, vegetation, and so on. I remember noticing this contrast as a kid. The sprites are of mixed quality. An interesting anecdote is that Ted Peterson and Julian Lefay were initially against using sprites taken from 3D rendered objects, thinking they would appear too choppy or origami-like. However, Mark Jones, one of the leading artists, still created some of them and showed the results to Ted and Julian. They were impressed, and some of the sprites in the actual game were made this way. I believe they rendered the creature as a 3D object, captured images, and alternated them to simulate animation. Different artists handle different resources, so the results are varied. There are distinct textures and objects for dungeons, some looking better than others. They add some variety, but given the sheer number of dungeons you explore, that variety eventually feels limited. Visual glitches are also common, such as monsters clipping through walls, which can sometimes help you find secret doors. Different regions of the wilderness wilderness are visually distinct. Daggerfall resembles a typical medieval city, while Sentinel feels like a giant fortified oasis in the desert. There are jungle and mountain ecosystems, and in winter you can see snow falling and rooftops being covered. The combination of 3D and 2D gives Daggerfall a unique aesthetic, slightly confusing at first, but instantly recognizable. To me, there is something nostalgic about it, a sense of an RPG era now lost. Regarding your character, you cannot view them in third person like in later Elder Scrolls games. You only have the character paper doll, similar to the one from Arena. At character creation, you chose a face from a small set of sprites for the race you wanted, and that's essentially all the customization available. A special mention goes to the game box, which went through multiple versions. Back then, browsing game stores meant you often bought a game that caught your eye and presented itself well on the box. So packaging mattered a lot more than it does today, in the digital delivery era. Daggerfall's box boldly stated, "Prepare for your new obsession." And they weren't wrong. I'm sure countless kids lost themselves in it for hundreds of hours. I wasn't expecting that line to be prophetic for me too. My new obsession became finishing this retrospective before it got completely grey. Speaking of sound, it is where Daggerfall really leaps ahead of Arena. In the previous game, environmental sounds like cries or screeches felt random, and music tracks would often cut out, leaving you in awkward silence. Daggerfall changes that. Sounds actually mean something. If you hear a monster roaring or grunting nearby, it's really there, maybe behind a secret door or in the next room. You can actually use audio cues to explore and survive. The music tracks are great too. They're still MIDI, like in Arena, but there is more variety, and the tracks convey very different moods. I'm really attached to this game's soundtrack. It exudes fantasy epicness all around. As a fun fact, MIDI tracks don't sound exactly the same on every PC. That's because MIDI isn't an audio file. It's a set of instructions telling your sound card to play notes using a library of instrument samples called the sound font. Different sound cards have different sound fonts, so the music can sound subtly different depending on your setup. Nowadays, you'll probably hear Daggerfall with the default Windows sound font, but Daggerfall Unity lets you choose any sound font file you like. like, if you're that terminally obsessed about the game's audio. Voice acting is extremely limited, only appearing in the main quest cutscenes. Everywhere else, you're reading all the dialogue and lore yourself. But hey, it's a 90s game, so no surprises there. The special mention goes to the horrible audio right at the start of the game. After creating your character, you see a cutscene where a book presents the premise of The Elder Scrolls Chapter 2.
400 years after Septimus' reign, the beginning will meet the end, and the bloody circle will close in the Empire of Tamriel. The unworthy heirs of the Septim dynasty have allowed the bonds of the Empire to weaken and crack. Uriel Septim the Seventh cannot repair what his ancestors ignored. The provinces fight among themselves like neglected children, drunk with rebellion, and one indomitable power hides itself, but not forever.
I suppose this was meant to feel epic, but the voice acting suffers, not from the performance, but from the poor sound quality. And the background music is far too loud. To make matters worse, there are no subtitles to help you follow what's being said. I can't imagine selling your game when one of the very first impressions is like this. Again, it was a whole another era in gaming. Daggerfall is the first Elder Scrolls game to fully establish the series' lore, and its influence is felt in every title that followed. Arena laid the groundwork for Tamriel, but Daggerfall truly fleshed it out. It introduces the Daedra and Daedric princes. In an interview, Ted Peterson said they were essentially demons, though the developers avoided the term. The gods are finally defined as the 8 divines, which will become 9 by the end of the game, and orcs become a playable race. It's like going on a second adventure module with your dungeon master. The first was a massive dungeon romp, but the second called for a full campaign, complete with a living, breathing world. Daggerfall's legacy stretches far beyond the Elder Scrolls. Many open-world and dungeon crawler games, especially those using procedural generation, owe some depth to its design. A standout project carrying that legacy forward is the Wayward Realms from Once Lost Games. Guided by Ted Peterson and the late Julian Lefay, it's considered Daggerfall's spiritual successor. This first-person, open-world RPG smashed its initial Kickstarter goal of $500,000 in just 12 days, funding a full year of development for a working demo. Despite Julian's passing, the team continues development, aiming for an early access release by the end of 2025. The goal is to recreate the computer GM experience of Daggerfall Julian was talking about in a recent interview, now enhanced by modern technology. For fans, it's a promise of nostalgia and innovation. Time will tell if it delivers. It's time to wrap this video up. This is the longest video I've ever made, and it took a lot of effort. I'm usually a pragmatic, straight-to-the-point guy, but while playing Daggerfall, new systems and mechanics kept popping up, sometimes obscure or easy to miss, like shields covering specific body parts. Some of these systems may seem minor or boring, but skipping them would do a disservice to Daggerfall, which is, in my opinion, a milestone in RPG history. I want to know from you if you appreciate a video this long, or if you prefer something less detailed and more in the 30 minutes range. I know there are multi-hour analyses out there, but I don't think it's my jam. Later Elder Scrolls games lean toward the power fantasy aspect, letting you become the hero the world needs. Arena and Daggerfall, while still putting you at the center, are more like a simulator for dungeon delving and living a fantasy life. I started playing Daggerfall for its historical importance, but I genuinely loved it. Normally, I'm not a fan of procedurally generated content. I prefer smaller, handcrafted games, but Daggerfall has something special. Daggerfall Unity made it even better. I would have played it anyway in its original form, like I did with Arena, but the modern controls, bug fixes, and the smaller dungeon option make it truly enjoyable even today. In an era where open-world games are criticized for filler content and repetition, it's important to remember video game history. The Daggerfall developers walked a fine line between genius and madness, and they knew it. Ted Peterson, the lead designer, even put himself in the game as Shiogorath, god of madness. It's an inside joke. They took a huge risk, and it paid off. Arena sold 120,000 copies, Daggerfall 700,000. Not massive by today's standards, but these were PC-only games in the 90s, when not everyone had a computer. Back then, video games were a niche, not the entertainment powerhouse they are now. Thank you so much for watching, I really appreciate it. Take care, and I'll see you in the next Elder Scrolls Retrospective.